My name is Justin, this is my wife Laura Bexley, and we've been certified foster parents for about a year and a half. Before we jump in and talk about our testimony, I just kind of want to frame our testimony that God is the one doing this work in us. All the good that's come from foster care and that ministry in our life is all the Lord. Isaiah 64:6 says, "Our righteous acts are like filthy rags," and this is definitely true of our story. We hope everything that we share today just allows you to see God's goodness and His glory.
So the idea of foster care and adoption came about after we had been married for about a year. We started discussing about how amazing it would be to take a child into your home and share the love of Jesus with them and be able to minister to them and their family, and just what an accurate description and living out the gospel that would be. So we kind of had those thoughts stuck in the back of our head, and it would periodically pop into the back of our head as we did life for the next few years.
So fast forward a few years, and we had just had our daughter Anna, our first child, and we were starting to see the blessing of the church around us as we started to parent her, and we're starting to get involved in the church. And Ryan one Sunday actually preached on adoption, and just like we're sharing, Chris and Tori Owen shared their testimony on foster care, and that's really what pushed foster care back to the forefront of our minds. We continued from there to really feel the Holy Spirit move, and we started to try to seek more information on how we can get plugged into the foster care ministry. Sometimes we tend to have an idea of what we think we want to do to bring God glory, and kind of oftentimes God has a different plan or a better way of doing things than we would picture. Isaiah 55:9 says that God's ways and thoughts are higher than ours, and there was definitely a conflict in us because we had a 6-month-old daughter, so the timing didn't feel great, but God was definitely telling us that He had a different plan for us.
There was one Sunday when I was sitting in church and I was thinking, you know what, we're crazy. I don't know why we're getting into this at this time in our lives. And I was looking at the other foster families and adopted families that I knew, and they all had a few biological kids and then waited till they got a little older and then had gone into foster care or had adopted. And so I left the service and I walked down to the child care area, and I met Mindy Hyatt. And she was new to the church, and she was telling me about her family, and she has biological daughters and adopted daughters and then a biological son, just interspersed and woven through her family. And I thought that was so cool because it was an immediate redirection from the Lord about my doubts that I had had just 30 minutes earlier.
God doesn't call us to live a comfortable, a logical, or even a safe life oftentimes. Francis Chan in his book Crazy Love summarizes, he says, God calls us to trust Him so completely that we are unafraid to put ourselves in situations where we'll be in trouble if He doesn't come through.
So we called our parents, and keep in mind we had a 6-month-old at home, and we told them that we were about to jump into foster care and take 1 to 2 kids between the ages of 0 and 5 into our home. And it was weird to us because they were not as excited as we were. And so that sparked a lot of conversations. Now our parents, all 4 of them are believers and they love the Lord, but they were vocal that this was not what they thought that God had called us to, especially at this time in our lives. And so that was a tough season, and there was a lot of tension there, but that tension helped push us further into the Lord and just trust His plan and His timing and His calling for our life in this season. And then despite hard conversations, God proved to be faithful in that area. When we had our first placement, before we had our first placement, when we were preparing, I felt very sure that we were going to have a baby girl and we were going to be able to adopt her, and I was going to match hers and Anna's bows and clothes, and it was going to be really great. But God had different plans, and so our first placement was a 17-month-old boy named AJ, and he was 17 months old, and our daughter Anna was 21 months old at the time. So it was almost like I had twins, except for I didn't know one of my twins.
AJ's arrival was definitely a whirlwind. We had been told by many people how hard it'd be in the first couple of weeks, and we always try and keep a positive attitude, so we told ourselves, we got this, it'll be just fine. It was just as crazy as people had described. We felt like we had no idea what we were doing, but we were just trying to do the best we could to love AJ. And one of my favorite verses, 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness." And this time really forced us to lean on the Lord for that patience and selflessness that was needed to love Him, because without that, we would inevitably fail. Hebrews 10:23 says, "He who promised is faithful." And as we stated earlier, our families were kind of hesitant to the idea of us doing foster care. But God's timing could not have been any more perfect, as crazy as it seems. So 5 days after AJ arrived in our house was my brother's wedding. So our families are very close to each other, having grown up in the same church, and so every single one of our immediate family members was going to be there at the wedding. So for those of you who don't know how a 17-month-old and a wedding fit together, there was about a 10-minute period in there where AJ had bit my brother-in-law while he was holding him and thrown a fork at my sister. So things were going pretty well, I would say. But amidst all of that chaos, God was softening our parents' hearts as they were able to see this face and this little boy, and were able to kind of see what God was doing.